Can you, as we transition here, I'm just looking at your archive, and you had a piece, just to put you on the spot here, so hopefully you remember, on May 9th saying green housing mandates are pushing Americans more into the red. Can you give us the takeaway on that one?
Oh, certainly. This is really troubling because it comes at a time when home ownership costs are already just at stratospheric levels. And now we're just adding insult to injury here. Essentially, what the Biden administration is doing is they are imposing energy requirements on a certain segment of the housing market. But the problem is that builders, when they are building homes, don't necessarily know whether or not these homes are going to be sold according to a certain program. They don't know if buyers are going to use a certain type of financing, for example, to purchase these homes. And so what happens when you put these regulations in place is that it effectively becomes a blanket regulation that all home builders are going to have to follow. And what's really crazy here is that these so-called energy saving requirements, these green energy requirements, that they're not even cost effective. What I mean by that is it'd be one thing if you were to say, okay, you have to insulate a home. Yes, it's going to cost more upfront, but within only a year or two, the home buyer is going to gain back all of that extra cost. And then it's just cost savings from there on out for the rest of the time they own the home. Well, that makes sense only at first, but you can take that to extremes where it doesn't make sense at all. And that's where we get this regulation here. It will take over 90 years for a homeowner to ever recoup the cost associated with these regulations. In other words, these energy requirements just simply don't make sense. I mean, think about it. Imagine a young couple buying one of these homes today, and they have a child right when they buy that home. According to life expectancy, not just the parents, but that child is going to live his or her entire life and then pass away before the homeowner ever breaks even on these additional costs that went into buying that home. I mean, this is insane. And yet, this is the kind of things that are being foisted upon the American people that are helping to drive up not just the cost of home ownership, but the cost of living. It is genuinely sad, again, especially when you consider that this is being thrown on top of the backs of the American people at a time when they're already so financially strained.
That dovetails your analysis with, I used to do a lot of work on the energy sector and specifically with climate change issues. And you're right, a lot of these regulations, they're very paternalistic, and they try to pass a cost benefit test because these regulations have to go through that. It's just part of the government procedures when they impose something like this. And they can always come up with some crazy justification, like you say, like using a very low discount rate and things like that. But what I would always say is, let's say you're right. In other words, folks, so they would be arguing this is actually going to benefit homeowners. It's going to save them money in the long run. So there's an effectively negative cost to these regulations for some of them. Like EJ is saying that, if you get more fuel efficient things, yes, it's a higher upfront cost, but then your bills going forward are lower permanently, and therefore you end up making money. And so it's a good thing. We're forcing businesses and homeowners to make money. And so my point was, if you actually believe that, if that's actually correct, and there's not important things you're leaving out of the analysis, like access to credit markets for one thing, then why do you need to force people to do it? Why don't you just put it up on your website or, email the packet to all the CFOs of the major companies, and they'll be like, there's money on the table here. We didn't realize. Thank you, Department of Energy or whoever it is, for giving us this information. We'll go install energy efficient windows and insulation starting next week because we're going to save money according to you. And obviously the reason they have to force people to do it is there's something missing in the analysis.
Exactly, 100%. And sure enough, if we look at the markets where we don't have this level of government intervention, of government regulation, those are the markets that are most efficient. Those are the markets that are most likely to deliver to customers the products and services they want at lower prices. Flat screen TVs and monitors are a really good example of this, where the cost for those products has come down tremendously over the last several years, over the course of a decade. And yet it was not because of government fiat that any of those things happened. It was because of innovation in the private sector. It was because of competition. And a lot of the features that consumers really love about things like smart TVs, for example, and their internet connectivity, those things weren't mandated by the government. They were things that businessmen decided, hey, I think customers would really like this. I'm going to put in the work to make this product a reality, and I'm going to take the risk that I think it's going to sell. And sure enough, those people have done very, very well for themselves. And the American people who have benefited from being able to have access to those products, they have done very well likewise. Why? How do we know that? Because they were more than happy to part with their money in order to get that product from that businessman. And so that's just, I think, a very good example of how the free market, if left to itself, if unfettered by the government, again, will deliver what consumers want. Why? Not because a businessman is charitable. It's because it's in his own best interest to do so. I think it was the economist Thomas Sowell. Oh, no, I'm sorry. It was Walter Williams, the late economist Walter Williams, who gave the example. Why is it that a Texas rancher or an Idaho potato farmer is getting up before dawn to tend to his cattle or to tend to his field so that New Yorkers can have steak and potatoes for dinner? Is it because he likes New Yorkers? Of course not. New Yorkers don't even like New Yorkers. So why on earth is he doing this? Why on earth is he breaking his back? It's because the New Yorkers are paying him to do it. It's because it's in his own best interest to do it. By serving his fellow man, he's able to make money. Conversely, how does a bureaucrat make money? Typically by harming his fellow man. And these regulations on housing are a perfect example of that.
Yeah, and going along with that too, it's funny. The U.S., like in the 2000s, the U.S. made much better gains relative to a lot of its like European counterparts and so on in terms of reducing carbon dioxide emissions per unit of GDP, or especially if you focus just on the energy sector, not because of mandates and things like that, even though they did have that stuff in place, but just because of the innovations in hydraulic fracturing or fracking and horizontal drilling. And so it just made it a lot easier. There was a natural gas boom, and you can produce electricity with fewer emissions using natural gas than coal. And so that is an example of your point where just let the market go. And a lot of times you achieve these other outcomes that these top-down government plans are ostensibly in place for. So, and you don't have the government's control over the energy sector if you go that route, which is another boost or another plus.